G'day everybody. I guess the first part of this on your pages as well now, you've probably seen us talking about flow versus pressure, which you probably would have seen a lot on our irrigation designs that go out there, not just ours, but everyone else's out there. I guess it's important to understand the differences between flow and pressure. A lot of the time we do get, I guess, questions that come through our store around, I guess, I'll ask a question, what's your pressure like? And I'll say pretty good, which I guess for us is hard because it's not a number and it's nothing tangible we can sort of work with. Or I'll say, what's your pressure like? And they'll say, yeah, it's really good. It's 30, 40 litres a minute, which obviously that's a flow rate we're talking about. So just wanted to sort of just touch on, I guess, the differences around flow versus pressure so people understand, I guess, the fundamental difference between those two, and then how we would calculate our flows and our pressures on sites before we were to put things in the ground. Obviously, as Clint touched on before, you guys are putting in systems that might be already designed, but there's also times where you're going to get given, smaller pocket areas or some reserves and what have you that you're going to do in-house, or even from an APG standpoint, they're not necessarily getting designed by us. It might just be, we've got the material, I guess, in our surplus of our stock, and we want to put that in the ground, I guess, without needing to worry about going to that design level because it might be something small, but understanding that flow and pressure is still important. So when we're talking about when we're talking about flow in Australia, we traditionally look at flow in references to litres per minute, obviously, and that's the amount of water that's travelling through the pipe over a given amount of time. So whereas with pressure, what we're looking at is the actual, I guess, best term would be against that sea level pressure, again with gravity. What's that level of pressure that we're receiving? And there's two different types there, which we can go through in the next part of it. But from a flow standpoint, traditionally in residential stuff, when we go irrigation designs for someone, we'll get them to do what's called a bucket test. When we do a bucket test, we ask them to basically, one, figure out the size of the bucket. So let's say for example, right now we're going to say we've got a 10 litre bucket. We know that that's the bucket. We would then go under a tap, and there's videos of Clint doing this on our websites, but you'd go under a tap and you would turn that tap completely on, put that bucket underneath, and then we would time how long it takes to fill that bucket. If you were doing that on a commercial side of things, what we've done before is we've used, you might have a backflow given to you there, or if it's I guess a new build or a new development. This happens a lot with the APG side of things for us as well. A new subdivision's going in or a new reserve's going in. We know that they've given us a 40 or a 50 mil water meter there. I'll say, okay, can I come off of that and then do a flow test from there, and we'll try and do some tests. And that might be a case of just concocting a bit of 50 mil PVC or some flexible hoses to come out of that water meter or a backflow, and then we can do the same thing. Tap, outlet, I guess either way it's a water source for us to be able to do it. Even if it's a pump, we can do the same sort of thing. Obviously with a pump, that data is already provided to us by those manufacturers, but it's the first step for us to work out a system is to know what the system can actually deliver from a flow point standpoint. So what we would do then from a flow rate standpoint, and as you can see on page 5, the formula for doing such a thing is your volume. When we say the volume, we're talking about the actual litres that bucket can hold. So in this instance, we said that it was a 10 litre bucket. We would times that by 60, and then we would divide that by the seconds that it would take us to actually fill that bucket. So in this instance, obviously, 10 times 60 gives us, you're doing that one there, yeah. So
how many seconds?
Let's say it took us 20 seconds to fill that bucket. All right, so we would then do 10 times 60, divide that by 20, gives us 30 litres a minute. Now, quite often, that's a great starting point for us to at least work from, especially from residential stuff when we're looking at lower flow rates. We might be designing MP rotator systems and drip systems that are anywhere from sort of 10 to 20 litres a minute. So we're on the lower end of the scale. When you start getting up to systems in football fields and large scale streetscapes where we've got to go 2.5 Ks, pressure starts to really come into it, because obviously we need to ensure that a backyard's 4 to 9 metre sort of throws at most for sprinklers, whereas when you start getting into golf courses and ovals, we start to get into that, I guess, 12 to 20 metre sort of distances. So we need to be very sure that the pressures that we're getting at that sprinkler is actually going to give us the distances. The differences, does that make sense from a flow rate standpoint? Obviously, it's a pretty straightforward formula, but we can obviously, we understand that we can put that data in. Again, if you guys, this is all for you to take away, but if at any point you came to us to do a system, these would be the first questions we would ask. What's your flow rates? What's your pressure? The next side of things is obviously static pressure. When we talk about static pressure, we are talking about the pressure with no water movement. So that's obviously at a static standstill point. What we would do there is, as Clint's showing you here, at a tap or at a backflow, if you know your system's off, you can obviously screw this pressure gauge into a test point on one of the backflows and be able to get a pressure off of that. Or if you're at a tap, we can actually put the pressure gauge onto our tap. Ball valve would be off because we don't want water obviously to be moving at this point. And we would turn our tap on up here, or open a ball valve or what have you, and then we would watch that pressure gauge go up. Now in a township supply, you would see, in a township supply being Adelaide, we're a gravity fed system, you're going to see anywhere sort of from 250 to 550 kPa. Once you sort of get into closer up into the hills, like sort of to where I live in the northeast, you're getting sort of 8 to 900 kPa. The further you go out, obviously being gravity, we're getting closer to sea level at that point. And there's all this infrastructure as well from all these houses that come off the networks. You get out to the west, traditionally we'll see, and like Morphett Vale.
Well, that's where we've had the biggest issues is Morphett Vale.
Yeah, those
200 kPa kind of.
Yeah, we're seeing some systems where static pressures are 250 to 300 kPa at static. Now, obviously we'll go into this a bit later with the sprinkler side of things, but if that's our starting point, you think of a tank of fuel or of a car, and you're only at 300 kPa, but somehow you need to achieve 300 at the sprinkler. There's no loss there. So as soon as you start applying flow, that pressure is going to come down. When we talk about the next, does that make sense from a static standpoint? So we want to see what that system's delivering us at no flow, which is going to give us a starting point. So for this, let's say we had 650 kPa of static. Probably the Salisbury guys, do you know what your mains lines, are they sort of around 650 statics? Varied obviously, depending on which side of the road it is, but you guys are all recycled water. Yeah, cool. Do you take a pressure reading at the start of your systems? Like you'd know what your pressures need to be delivered at a point as well. So then you'd obviously dynamically work that out. So if we were doing, I guess on that, if we were doing a system for Salisbury off of their reclaim network, similar to this, but instead of static pressure, it's that initial duty point pressure that we're going to be provided to us at a connection point at a flow rate that's available to us. And then obviously the idea behind that is there, for better choice of words, shandying that water or sharing that water across a market to not just council, but you guys on-sell that to people as well, schools and the like as well. So, and a pump is the same spec. It's still that starting point, and then we know that we can work down from that, but that pump's going to give us at a point a certain amount of pressure. So the next type of pressure that we get is dynamic pressure, and that's the pressure at water movement. What we see there is when you turn that tap on, before when we did the bucket test, you would be very close to 0 kPa of pressure, no pressure, because we're opening that up completely, and which means we're at atmosphere effectively. We're at atmospheric pressure, which is back to 0.
That's if the valve's fully open.
Fully open. And if we were to do that, there might be a small amount of back pressure of it trying to get through this unit, but it's going to be very close to 0 because there's no back pressure there. It's just flowing out. So what we would do then is similar to that bucket test. What Clint's got here is a flow versus pressure test kit that we build and sell and hire out to our customers.
For these guys, we lend it.
Yeah, we just lend it out to you guys.
Do you guys own, like APG have these in your tools at all? No, not anywhere in the business? Sorry? Because we do the tests for them sometimes, don't we?
Correct.
And do you guys have any of these at Salisbury? You wouldn't need them because you're running off pumps. Oh, you've got one? Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
So what I'm doing now is just adjusting the handle until I get a point on the gauge that I'm happy with, so to try and meet those points.
So APG as an example, obviously we did one out at Galway for the guys. There was obviously just a water meter given there, and we were involved in the irrigation design standpoint, so I wanted to make sure before the water meter was there, we already did the design, because that's a lot of the time you're designing ahead of housing networks getting in. Now that comes to the construction phase, we want to make sure that what we've designed is actually going to work. So we'll get engaged by the client at times as well to go out there and actually test the flow and the pressure, and then we'll cross-check that back against our system to make sure that that works. What you will see on not just our designs, but almost most of the irrigation designs out there, it will say this system's designed as 50 litres a minute at 350 kPa, and that's what, when we do that, we're doing that to make sure that a $50, $60, $200,000 job doesn't go in the ground, and then we realise it doesn't work. So we're trying to capture that information prior, because if there needs to be changes, we can do that before construction phase. And as you guys know, you don't want to sort of be or hand over to council when you've got a system, an asset that doesn't even deliver a turf quality that you want. So what we normally do, as Clint was showing with the pressure test kit, is on the tap, we've obviously had that open flow, and we would then say, okay, we're going to get, on this one here, we might say open flow is going to give us 100 litres a minute. Yep, so then that will be a flow rate here at 0 kPa. That's our maximum that the system. Now obviously, as you guys know, you need pressure to be able to get distance out of sprinklers. You need pressure to be able to open up drip valves, open up solenoid valves. There's got to be a level of pressure, so we can't use that 100 litres a minute. So what I normally ask the guys is a minimum of it. Obviously I like the more the better, but sometimes depending on how much pressure we have, it's not achievable. I try and give me 3 points of pressure. And what Clint's done here is fine. We've got a 3, 4 and a 500 kPa pressure rating. Now if that pressure was this was here at 300, I'm obviously not going to get a 500. I would say I want 3 points in between 0 and this highest number. So what we would do here is we would crack this open from being closed, which is our static, and so we would then start to see that come down from the 650 kPa pressure, and we would open that up until we saw 500 kPa on the dial. And once we see 500 kPa on the dial, we then measure with this unit. It'll tell us a flow rate, obviously at 500 kPa, and then we would record that. So for this instance, we might say at 500 kPa, let's say 20 litres a minute. Now again, if you didn't have the flow test kit and you just had a pressure gauge and a ball valve, it's the same thing as the bucket test. We do the same thing. We just make sure that we've got that pressure set where we want it. Then we put the bucket under and we time those seconds, do the calculation, and you'll get your litres per minute difference again. Then we would then open the valve till we got to 400 kPa of pressure. Same thing, we would then say, okay, we've got, let's say 45 litres a minute. And then we go again to 300 and we get 75 litres a minute. And this is examples obviously, but traditionally we'd see the further you open the valve, obviously the more flow you're going to get, but then the further that pressure comes down. What that allows us to do, and I don't know if you guys have seen pump curves or not, but it allows us to graph this out to be able to work out a system, and for you guys to work out your system. If we were to graph this out, this is our 650 kPa of pressure at 0 flow from here, and then we would be at 100 litres a minute at 0 flow, but at 0 kPa of pressure here as well. And then with these 3 points, what we're seeing is something similar to that, all right? And we start to work out on the curve where we design a system, once we'll go into this with a flow rate standpoint, but we start to see on the system where we can actually fit, and even from a Salisbury standpoint with their pumps, we know, we might have a system that's designed at 75 litres a minute, but I need 500 kPa, and I know that I don't have that. So then my result would be that I need to then split those valves up in that design, or if we can't do that and we're left with a system, I guess the investment is that that asset's already there, then we would need to go looking at tanks and booster pumps to try and get that pressure up.
You know, there's not a lot of cases, but there's cases in Charles Sturt and other councils where they've got the flow, but they don't have the pressure. So they'd be getting, obviously you can see 100 litres a minute might be coming into a system, but it's at 80 kPa or something. What they'll do is they'll put a tank that catches that water and then they'll pump it back out at the same flow, but at a higher pressure. So the system can work 24/7 if it needed to, because all you're doing is increasing the pressure, but not the flow. But we can't increase, as you'll see in the document there, you can't decrease your pressure using flow control. That's a separate thing anyway.
Yeah, and I guess it's important for us to know this data as well. And the beautiful thing for you guys as well, obviously, as Clint said before, you guys work for a business. But from our standpoint as a designer, and I've experienced this before, you guys see, I guess, you know, the traditional sort of 20 metre wide blocks with the one water meter on them. Now they're getting subdivided into twos. Now you've got 2 water meters on that network. The standard street that might have had 50 houses now has 100 houses on it. So there's 100 water meters, what was 50. Those water demands outside of irrigation are now way higher. You've got twice the amount of toilets, showers, all that sort of stuff happening. And then right around the corner is your reserves that you're trying to water. And obviously, especially from like not so much new development, but from existing stuff, what you had available to you 15 years ago when a system was designed to what's potentially available in that network now, the flow's the same, but there's more people taking from that. And even in your pump networks, obviously that's, you know, why you would have had some level of future proofing in your pumps, and the ability to keep adding pumps in there is obviously, you know, that demand's going to build as you start to sell that water off to people as well. So what this does is this is a snapshot in time for us when we do a design as well, because we can see that we've designed a system when we say to someone, yeah, at that time it was working and it's all fine, but if things change, we can go back and look at this data, do this test again, and then we go, right, we understand why this data has happened. So
that's why we have this information on all of our designs. There'll be a lot of times where we'll do a design and it won't get installed for 12 to 18 months, and all of the things that Matt's just talked about with, you know, urban sprawl and infrastructure changing in that area might mean that the available water today is different to what it was at the design stage. And it just means that as a contractor, that you guys don't go put a whole system in that doesn't work, and as a council, you're not having to have difficult conversations with contractors after the job's finished. It enables the contractor to go, all right, well, we've done a test and it's different to what it said on the plan. What steps do you want to take? Do you want to redesign it? Do you want us to make changes? And at least as a contractor, you're not stuck financially with the burden. And it has happened. We've had issues where the pressure just wasn't there, and it was there and then it wasn't there. And you'll find that the councils or your clients are much more willing to communicate about variations at that start rather than at the end.
it also goes the other way, which is probably more rare, but we have experienced. When we don't know, we'll ask our client, or they'll ask us just to nominate a flow and a pressure of what we think, and we sort of use data, you know, of jobs we've used around in the area. Obviously, as we were talking about with Onkaparinga side of things down south, we nominated quite a low pressure and low flow rates because that's what we've seen. But this new development went in, and the flow and pressure was 6 times what we were expecting. So that actually went the other way. So we'd originally designed this system with, I think it was something like 55 valves, because we were basing it on no more than 50 litres a minute. But now all of a sudden we knew we had 150 litres a minute or 200 litres a minute available. So
at pressure as well.
At pressure. So we were able to then go, and obviously it hadn't been supplied or installed at this point, so we go, cool, we can actually now, instead of putting 4 25mm solenoid valves in, we put 150 or 40mm solenoid valve in, and we can have all of those, and we go into this later with scheduling, but Now we haven't got individual stations coming on for 45 minutes. We've got one station doing 45 minutes. So your watering window's now just reduced by 25%, just by calculating some data at the start. So yeah,
You're probably reducing your infrastructure and installation costs as well, like the initial, a little bit.
Yeah, especially and again, we'll go into this later, but, and you guys have probably all dealt with it, but benching out and installing a valve set from a commercial standpoint, as you know, it's traditionally one valve box per valve is what we see out there. Even if it is a 25mm valve, it's a station per box. If we can reduce that, it's less valve boxes that you guys, not great from us from a sales standpoint, but
even from a public safety standpoint, you've got less.
It's less things that can go wrong. It's, yeah, we try and obviously see, you see it, you would have seen it, like so many valve boxes sitting in lawn areas that need to then be, whippersnipped around and what have you. If we can reduce that number, it's just a win-win for everyone. So,
well, except the people that sell the irrigation.
Yeah, except for us selling it, but yeah. But again, long game for us is obviously that means that there's also more money in the bank from a budgetary standpoint to actually put more systems in the ground too, of renewal systems that might be 25 years old. We can do this again. So, yeah. Does that make sense from a pressure versus flow standpoint? Is there any questions around that? And again, like I said, and Clint's touched on as well, is the idea is to give you guys this information to be able to use when you do have your own little systems that you might put in or what have you, but we're also only a phone call away, and we can either come out and do this for you or step you through it, because the better the quality is for us from a design and supply, the better the result is for everyone. There's less stuff coming back to us, and we want to see quality turf surfaces out there as well.
I think irrigation is one of those things that quite often get under-designed at the start, and it's an example that we've used plenty of times, but you can't build a house without a plan, but plenty of people will go start putting an irrigation system in without a plan, and the amount of pain and money and time that you'll save by getting it designed correctly at the start is definitely worth spending that time. And so, yeah, we would encourage you, if you're doing your own pressure versus flow tests, I'd be recording them somehow, whether or not it's like as an individual, if you're just doing it to protect your own ass against the world, then keep it in your phone or Google Drive or whatever, and I'd videotape the test or photograph the test and keep records of it. As a company, I'd keep records of it just so that if at any point anything does change, you can go, well, I've got video of us doing the test. So, because you know what it's like, something goes wrong, they're going to come straight to you and go, well, you guys fucked up. And it's probably not the case. Like a lot of times things change or, people make changes and then lie about it. At least if you've got that evidence, then you can protect yourself. But
there's probably a little bit on that in regards to, and for the Salisbury guys and APG obviously doing work for councils, is the importance of that design is it keeps it very clear of what the expectations are. I guess if there's a contractor putting in a system in for you guys at the start, if all this data is collected, everyone's all across the same page. We know that quotes and supply are all going out. So it's going to work, and it's just less headaches when it comes time to actually owning that infrastructure for you guys once all the housing developments have sold, and then it's now your thing to worry about. So yeah, all good on that side of things. All right. One thing, I guess I just want to move through to precipitation rates with sprinklers. When we talk about precipitation rates, what we're talking about, I guess, if we think about rainfall, you hear about it's rained and we've got 5 mil of rain, 10 mil of rain. Precipitation rate is exactly the same as that. It's the amount of water that we're applying onto our surface, whether it be garden beds or turf. One thing from a design standpoint that doesn't get factored in enough sometimes is the precipitation rates or the desired precipitation rates that are there. And there's factors that are involved in the precipitation rates that are your soil types. Obviously, City of Salisbury, Mawson Lakes, all the Bay Biscoe heavy clays. Obviously, I don't know how much that gets cultivated and then, good infiltration rate soil is brought in. I think if it is, it's probably at a very minimum layer just to get a growing medium going. APG, obviously you guys have done a lot of work out in the Playford area. It's the same thing. You've got some heavy clays out there, and then you sort of head out to the west on the sand belt, and you're into you've really fast flowing sands. No system can necessarily just be treated the same in that regard. Like the precipitation rates are completely different. We've seen drip systems in heavy clay situations putting out 18 mil an hour, but that clay can only take 5 or 6. The evident result is runoff. You're going to have water flowing out everywhere. So we need to design systems and schedule controls and what have you to be able to take that water properly. And obviously that means you guys are paying for water, whether it be recycled or not. There's still electricity costs to pump that out as well. So there's a lot that we can benefit from precipitation, understanding precipitation rates in sprinklers. You also need to know not from new stuff, but your existing ovals. A prime example was Brahma Lodge Oval for me 10 to 12 years ago, would have been 12 years ago now, auditing that oval. That oval had, obviously, things break over the time, and then there's, whatever might have been, I guess, whatever nozzle or whatever sprinkler was in the vans for the guys at the time get put in there to obviously keep that system operational. But you've got varying sprinklers going into these areas, trying to maintain an existing safe playing surface for people, which we're not thinking about, and obviously you might have one sprinkler doing 10 litres a minute, one doing 30, so you're going to have this inconsistent grass growth. So we need to be thinking about precipitation rates being consistent for everyone in that as well. So when we do precipitation rates, what Clint's got up here is your first one, which is an MP rotators. Everyone obviously familiar with the MP rotator nozzle. You guys use them out on sites as well? Yep. Do you guys use pressure regulated bodies for yours as well? Some of them, yep. Most times now we're seeing pressure regulated bodies becoming the specified one. What that does is it means we don't need to factor in having too much reduction in pressure in between different valves. We can actually just we know that if one sprinkler station's got 4 and one's got 10, all those sprinklers are going to be maintaining the same pressure, so we can just think about the nozzle selections doing their throws that we're trying to get. The MP rotator is a match precipitation rate. So what that means is when we have a quarter circle, as you'll see on the drawing, or we have a half circle or a full circle, those nozzles, as we adjust the arc on those nozzles, the actual flow rates that are coming out of those are adjusted to be matched with all the other sprinklers in their model range, not every other brand, but inside their model range. So an MP1000 or an MP3000, the idea is that you can put quarters, halves, fulls all on the one station and not have to think about changing nozzles like you would have with the old van sprays or gear drive nozzles and all that sort of stuff. So gear drive nozzles have come up a little bit now by bringing in MP like match precipitation nozzle sets as well, but they're not as diverse in their range, depending on, like for soccer fields and stuff like that, they don't really have as much options there. So what Clint's done here is if you refer to your page 7 on your books, we've replicated that up here, and you'll see a lot of the time your sprinkler manufacturers have given you the data for us to refer to. We use the same data from a design standpoint. These are done obviously in lab conditions, so when they say a sprinkler can throw 4.1 metres, obviously traditionally we try and be a little bit conservative about that because, sitting on top of a hill you're going to have wind blowing. These are done inside a vacuum sealed room to be able to get that accurate test over and over again. So we wouldn't normally design a system if it says it can throw 5 metres. We're not going to throw 5 metres. We would always sort of come back and allow for some losses there as well. But for today's exercise, we're just using what the data is on the page, if that makes sense. So what we've done is we've selected an 18.2 square area, and looking at these,
this is quite intentional as well. I've made the design fit the sprinklers just to make the maths easier.
Correct. We would look at obviously the sprinkler selection that would work best for that area, and in this situation we've decided to use the MP rotator, and we would say that looking at your sheet, if you were to look at the bottom where the MP rotator guide is, on the right hand side you can see it says MP3000. If you cast your eye down from that, you'll see where it says radius and there's a bold one there that says 9.1 metres. All right, so that's, for us, that's why we've done this one at 18.2, just to make it nice and easy for everyone. But that sprinkler's at the pressure, which if you go all the way to the other side, you can see it's at 2.8, which is 280 kPa. That gives us 9.1 metres of throw for a sprinkler. Next to that, you'll see the flow in cubic metres per hour. That's 0.42. Obviously, I'm looking at the 180 degrees, sorry, just to clarify for everyone. Obviously, if you looked up, you'd have a 0.2 for the 90 degrees. The formula that we've got on the top of the page is we're calculating the total cubic metres for the area that we're trying to irrigate. So in this situation, what we've done is we've looked at the 90 degree sprinklers and we've gone, okay, well, they're going to be using 0.2 cubic metres an hour. Full circle's 0.84 and the half circles are 0.42. And we add all of those together because that's the total area we're trying to look at. Now that might be a little quadrangle area for council areas, or it could be someone's backyard. If APG are doing, you know, some, I guess, bunches of houses as well, and you wanted to work out how much are we actually applying for their backyard. So what Clint's done here is he's obviously, honestly, this is the same process that we do, just we've got spreadsheets that we've tried to automate this for, but we add it all together. The formula is 1,000 times the total of that divided by the spacings of the sprinklers. Sorry, for this area is the area length and width, which is 1,000 times 3.32 divided by 331.24. Does that make sense, that math? We're just adding this data up to get us a total area. If we were to do, you got that on your phone? Cool. If we were to do this now, should (10.022 mils per hour). Now, one benefit of cross-checking to see that your calculations are right with this data is if you were to look across the page on the right-hand side, you'll see precip mils per hour in the square. Obviously, we're doing a square-style system here, and you can see the number for those is 10 mil an hour. That's a good cross-check. Now, if we were to do, just to give you, we won't run that formula, but as I was saying before, if we were to have this was our space, let's say there's spacings, we wanted to bring this a little bit closer to allow for wind and that sort of stuff. What's obviously going to happen is if we're bringing those sprinklers closer, this number becomes reduced. The flow rates don't, but our numbers becomes reduced. So then that would obviously in turn increase our application rate. And that's something that needs to be factored in a lot of the time that we see, and this is for especially long term for football fields and that as well, is people will calculate what the number here says, not what's real world on actually happening in your spacings on your ovals. So it's a good measure sometimes, and we'll go into this afterwards from an auditing standpoint, is to understand exactly what is your spacings across your area of those sprinklers as well. To be able to try and work out your true application rate, what not your theoretical application rates are as well. Because that could be the difference of, let's say, 2 to 3 mils per hour.
Goes to 13 at 16.
Correct. So that's 3 mils per hour across that difference. Now, if you were running that at the same run times, you're actually putting on more. 30%. Yeah, it's a 30% increase in your water at $3 a kiloliter over every, you know, for your stations, for a whole council. Now that's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if it's free water that you guys are collecting, nothing's free. There's infrastructure costs to collect that and pump that out as well. There's so many more elements in that come into play. Beyond that, the other side of it is if you really wanted to get into higher level turf, like golf courses and greens and that sort of stuff, they're watering down to that millimetre precisions, because Any more becomes fungal problems, and any less you can lose a green because of cool season turf. So there's so many other. It's important to know, and for your own, like obviously, if you have an answer, you get asked why is our expenditure up on water, and you can actually go back and do these tests and figure out what are we actually meant to be doing.
A lot of these calculations can be used when working. So if any of you ever get to the point where you're working with residential clients or you're working in the country and there's rainwater tanks is the only water source, you can actually use this calculation to go, look, we've quoted to landscape your whole backyard, the total amount of water you're going to probably need to get 25 mil of equivalent rainfall for 8 months a year, and we'll talk about this in a bit, is 180,000 litres, but you've only got 44,000 litres worth of water storage, which is including, you need that for showering and drinking water and fire safety. We've got an issue with the amount of available water. So you need to now make a decision. Do you want to install more infrastructure and have bigger tanks? Or do you want to reduce the amount of water you apply? Or do you want to remove the amount of areas that you're irrigating in?
But you're having that conversation. So, yeah.
It's really easy for me to see how this all connects in my head because I've been doing it for so long. And what we're trying to bring to you guys is this vision of like available water, what we need to do, how much it applies, and then how this all interconnects, and then it will really, really make sense. And you'll go, okay, cool. So if we water for an hour longer, it's going to use $1,000 worth more water. Or if we bring the sprinklers close together, there's because this is so scientific. Every action that you have in this irrigation system, the amount of time you water for, how far the sprinkler throws, what they're spaced at, what sprinklers you choose to use, they all have a direct result, which is calculatable. It's not just like, as you've seen, like we're getting down to the decimal points of theoretical data as well. That's important to remember.
Just quickly, it comes up a lot for us is rainwater tanks and pumps for residential areas and the size of the pumps the size of the tanks that they have in their residential properties. And I see people say, I've just put a 2,000 litre slimline tank down the side of my house. Prior to winter, I'm set for the rest of the year now that I've got rainwater. And then I say, how many stations do you have in your yard or in your house? And they say, as an example, 6 stations, and 6 stations is doing 30 litres a minute. It's 180 litres a minute for every one of those stations. And if you were to do that out by an hour, it's 10,800 litres. You wouldn't even get through one night's worth of water in your 2,000 litre tank. And so
an hour of water, as we've seen, is only 10 mil.
That's right. So you're not even, and I'm not saying not to harvest rainwater, but from a City of Salisbury standpoint, and I've said this to a lot of residential customers, I'm like, you're better off for the greater good is actually let that water go out to the street and you guys collect it for the reserves and open areas, because what are you doing with that real estate for 2,000 litres of water that's going to do nothing? Or you're better off just using it in your toilet for flushing and those sort of things.
Yeah.
Or drinking water and that sort of stuff.
It enables you to calculate what works. And then you can go, well, a 2,000 litre slimline tank is going to cost me $1,600, or a 10 or 12,000 litre round tank is going to cost me $3,000. There's not a massive difference between that. Let's invest that amount of money and actually take advantage of it, rather than putting all this infrastructure in to water an hour a month in winter, maybe. Like, because obviously the tank's going to refill when it rains.
In a month when you're not really watering.
When you don't need to water, yeah.
So that was a big thing. We used to say, once you get to summer, your rainfall's down, and then you're out of water within the first night. So, and this is all factored in for City of Salisbury side of things. You guys know what your tanks need to hold for infiltration, which we can go into afterwards as well.
You'll see on Playford Council designs now that they have in the valve table the amount of time required to deliver 10 mil of water. That's relevant, and that's coming from this data. And so that enables the councils to review the designs, and then also helps them when they're scheduling. So I don't know if you have that on your plans or not, but this enables you to work it out. You can actually go back and go, okay, well, how much water is being applied? How long should we water for? But that's the next thing. So
most of those designs that we do now, like on the right, all your valves will be numbered. It'll have your valve flow rates, and it'll have time to apply 10 mil. And we just use the 10 mil because it's a nice, easy number.
Is that a problem? That's not a fire or anything?
I don't know what that is. So what we would then, for you guys to know, as we'll talk about a bit later as well, is the if we want to put on 25 mil, we know if that's the number we're giving you guys, we can just go to 2.5 times that to apply that over a week is how many minutes you need to do. So then you can look at your soils, because sometimes obviously with a design standpoint, we don't necessarily see we try and get as much information, but we might not know what your soil types are. You guys, City of Port Adelaide, Enfield, apply wetting agents into all their, they inject wetting agents in now, so their water holding capacities are increasing, so they don't have to be watering all that, because they're on sandbelt areas, like to be such infrequent and having really shallow root systems. They can obviously promote that deeper root structure. We might not know that at the time, so if they've got a base data to go with, it helps them from a scheduling standpoint. Does that make sense from an MP rotator standpoint for everyone? Obviously, Rainbow do one with the R-vans as well. It's matched precipitation, and then you would be the same for some gear drives that have matched precipitation. The beauty of that is it's one sprinkler nozzle for multiple sort of, I guess you can select it being quarter, half, full, and you don't have to think about the flow rates, because as you adjust the arcs to suit, they reduce their flow accordingly. So the technology's been built in that to kind of take what's next away from that thinking process. If you do have systems that are football fields, soccer fields, larger sort of turf areas that you're not using, and obviously some councils as well don't have, we get specifically saying that they do not want to use MP rotators as part of their design. No matter in any circumstance, it is gear drives, and if you cannot use a gear drive, then go to subsurface. And obviously that's their personal choices, but then we need to then factor in how far can we go with gear drive systems, and making sure that we're keeping even precipitation rates as well, because we don't want to be watering over in some areas, and obviously we don't have that matched precipitation nozzle anymore that we're going to a gear drive sprinkler. So what you'll see on, I guess as an example, you'll see this on some of the soccer fields, and I'll use Brahma Lodge Oval as a bit of an indicator as well, or any soccer field as well. But if this was a station running down here, and that was a station, and that was a station, what we see a lot of the time is the nozzle that's in this sprinkler is the same that's in this sprinkler, and the nozzle that's in the full circle is the same as the half circle. And what's happening there, if you think about a full circle sprinkler is doing 360 degrees, so it's taking X amount of time to get all the way around. That half circle sprinklers watered the same amount of grass in half that. It's done twice the amount of watering, because effectively it's gone like this and it's come back and watered it again before that next 360's back. So those, if we nozzled them the same, what's happening is these areas are effectively, if this was one valve, these corners are getting double the amount of water as what the half circles are. So you end up seeing, and you do see that in football fields especially, where the outer rings of a football field are, I guess, quite green, and the main area in the middle is quite dry, because what happens there is they put it all on the same nozzle and they all get 30 minutes 3 times a week, and there's not really much thought gone into it, and the result is inconsistent turf growth, which can also create an unsafe playing surface for a lot of the communities as well. Does that make sense what I'm saying there? And you guys would see that. And again, that happens not so much at new design stage, but it happens over the course of a 10 to 15 year old system, where you're going out there and you've gone, I've busted a sprinkler, go back into my tub and I'll grab a sprinkler out and chuck that back in, and there's no thought given to what nozzle's in there. And when we look at, as you'll see on page 8, the flow rates between nozzle sets is astronomical. So if you were to go down and look at, have you run under pressure with your calcs at all on the screen?
I'm waiting for you. We'll populate that.
That's cool. So if you were to look at the 3500, which is a Rainbow, is one of their smaller gear drive sprinklers that they do.
Which is pretty similar throw to the MP3000, which was what we were looking at before.
Yep. So, and you were to go down to a pressure of 3, which is 300 kPa of pressure. You can see the flow as litres per minute for the smaller sprinkler is doing 2.86 litres a minute, but the largest is doing 15. So there's a lot of difference in flow rates there that we need to actually factor in. So for trying to work out our flow rates for this system, what we do is we look at our highest flow system here. So it's either our full circle or our half circle, is whatever our biggest nozzle selection would be, because that's what we need to, and we try and match that based on, did you use your distances based on 300 or 250?
300, sorry,
300?
yeah,
Yep, cool.
3.
So for the exercise, what we've done here is at 300 kPa, for this area, we've selected a number 2
when
nozzle.
When he says 300 kPa, you're looking at the 3.0.
Under the pressure bar is 3. But then you go down the nozzle and you'll see that there's a number 2 nozzle there. And that radius is saying it's going to be doing 8.2 metres of distance. Again, as I said before, these are in test situations. There's not allowing for wind and that sort of stuff. That sprinkler for litres per minute is doing 7.17 litres a minute or 0.43 cubes an hour. So that's for that half circle. Now on this station, I know I've got 2 quarter circles as well, which is half of a half circle. So what I need to try and do is find a nozzle that's effectively going to give me half that flow rate, because it's going to be covering that area in twice the amount of time. Does that make sense? So what we would then look at is that we know that we're looking at 7.17. We want to try and find something around 3.5 or just above. So we would then see here the number 1 nozzle is going to be doing 3.93 litres a minute or 0.24 cubes per hour. Now, one thing to consider here, and this is more from a design standpoint, but what you do notice is we've compromised our distance that we've been able to achieve by originally having 8.2 metres. Now we're seeing 6.4 metres with that smaller sprinkler. So this isn't actually going to throw as far either, but we try and get it as best as we can. So yeah, in this situation, where we combat that is we try and not do this by having all the same nozzle on one station. So then like we said here, we're using a number 2 nozzle, for example. We might use all these as number 2s, but these half circles, because they're only all half circles, we can also use those as all number 2s. All we have to do is we have them on half the amount of runtime. And so then we're starting to impact our water windows. That works great in situations like this, but small reserves where you might have a nice run of half circles and then there's only one little corner circle, you're not going to put that necessarily on its own valve because it's just a whole solenoid valve. So you try and say, okay, well, we want to leave that, bring that in on one of the other valves, but we need to put a smaller nozzle in it because it's covering that area twice as much.
In most cases, that's at design level, the designers are going to take into consideration the requirements of the client and then just make a decision that's the best possible situation. As you'll see on those charts, by putting a number 1 there, I think we're only throwing 6.4 metres instead of the whole 8.2, which means we're not getting head to head. There's a whole nother level of scheduling above that where we'll actually probably have to overwater to...
Or we bring those spacings in
closer together.
And then that allows us to... A lot of the time, when we're doing this, you'll see on our designs, and not just our designs, anyone's designs, the number, you'll see like a hashtag. What would happen on the system for this is in a design, you would see Rainbird 3500 series sprinkler with a number 2 nozzle unless noted, because that's our predominant, I guess, default nozzle. And then you would see on the drawing, like Clint's got here, hashtag 1, and we wouldn't necessarily put a hashtag 2 on that because that's the default of the legend. And then we would just, anywhere that is different to the standard, we would make a point of that. And that's critical from you guys installing systems, is to take note of those nozzles, because you're going to get, if you don't, you're going to have inconsistent results, not just on your turf, but whether or not that system even works, because sometimes we might be close to the line flow rate wise to get it, in order to get a system to work, and we need that flow.
might just be worth mentioning that station. So the
Yeah.
center station has a full circle and 2 halves, whereas the sides have a half and 2/4. I've done the same nozzle configuration, which might not make sense because you've got a half circle here with a 1 and a half circle here with a 2. The reason we've done that is because the run time. So we're going to combine the technique here and the technique here, and so if we had, you know, we might run this station for half an hour and this one for 15 minutes because then we're still delivering.
Other way. But yeah, full circles will go for twice as long.
Yes.
Yep.
Sorry.
But
yeah. That's why he's the guy.
But yeah, so what Clint's saying there is obviously, and what I was talking about with the football field down here was this here has obviously got to do full 360s. So we'll work out our application rate. And once we know that, we effectively, there's 2 ways we normally show this. We will show it by half the amount of runtime, or this is double the amount of application rate for that station. So it depends on, it's the same result on how it's represented, because the ultimate result is you water half the amount or the original amount, if that makes sense. So for this one, same.
I'm just trying to work out how we're going to calculate this. Like if you just wanted to calculate that station, you can't, because you can't square it out. Do you know what I mean?
It's not a whole area.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you would just treat it like an outer area like that. But
give me 15 minutes. You just keep talking. I'll work it out.
yeah, so we're working out the application rate on the total area for this one. There's other methods of calculating precipitation rates. What this method does is it works out the total area, but there's other ways where we can work out, and it's a very similar formula, but it's working out the flow rates of just that station that's in question. And all that is we look at the arcs that we're looking at. So if it's 180 degrees, we use that in the multiplier. If it's 90, we use that, plus the length of the sprinklers, so the gaps between each sprinkler, and then the gap between the rows, which is the pipes across an oval or a reserve or whatever it might be. And the beauty of that is it allows us to, you might have areas where you might be, say, 10 mil an hour through the majority of your area, but then in some areas it sort of tightens up. We want to then calculate just those little areas separately, and that allows us to have, it might be an increase in application rate for just these little spots, and we know that we don't want to just treat it all as 30 minutes per runtime. We might say, well, that's actually putting on 5 mil an hour more in that area, so that's only water for 20 minutes, and so we're still then putting that right amount of water out over our total area. While Clint's doing this one, I'll talk about precipitation rates for drip tube. Obviously you guys, both APG and City of Salisbury, would have a vast amount of inline drip through your council areas. And I guess one, the importance of the spacings being put in properly. One, from an install standpoint, but two, from understanding that spacing and how that represents an application rate for you guys.
So it's 10 mil.
Good.
It's just a really shitty 10 mil.
Yeah. But, so going back on this, what we're saying effectively is we would say, okay, that's 10 mil. Technically speaking, that's 20 mil because it's doing it in twice the amount of time. So we would then put that on for half the amount of time as well. All right. You already drawn up the drip side of things, ready to go. So when we're talking about the drip, you guys would probably, what drip tube do the City of Salisbury tend to specify? Netafim Tech line?
Is it 0.4, 1.6? 0.4 by 0.4?
Yep.
So
Cool.
same as Playford. So exactly the same spec that everyone in the room is talking the same number.
Yeah. So
you'll see why once we start working through this table.
The flow rate of the dripper that we're talking about is not the total amount on that dripper, on that drip line, should I say. It's the individual dripper. So it's what that dripper is putting out per dripper. And so no different to a sprinkler is that's the emitter So it's whether it's the nozzle coming out of a sprinkler or it's the hole coming out of a dripper, it's the same thing. Netafim's standard drip line is 1.6 litres per hour. It's a pressure compensated dripper, which means the varying pressures that come into that will maintain that 1.6 litres per hour. We don't need to think about that upstream pressure in the drip tube delivering us different flow rates. Like if you remember,
Provided that it's inside the range.
Providing it's inside the range, we normally set that range back at the valve by putting a pressure reducer on it, and we know that if it's inside that, we're okay. Compared to the old targeted drips, which you guys have probably been used to seeing, if you remember the 8-stream outlet Antelco Shrubler, which
Like
we
the
still,
the Octa 8,
or the
yeah.
Octa 8s, which were the green top options, and as you adjust that flow squirts more or less, and the difference between that is obviously the more pressure that comes in on that too, the more flow rate that's coming out. So, and then as you adjust one, you've then technically impacted the flow rate on every single other one, whereas a pressure compensated drip line is consistent across that line, providing, again, as Clint said, you stay within the design parameters of the product.
Has anyone rushed ahead and started calculating these ones?
Yep. So the formula for
You've
the
done it already?
calculated precip rates. Ready to go?
Anyone? Someone want to work the top one out for me?
So the formula for that is the flow rate in litres per hour. So in this case, it would be 1.6. And then we're dividing that by 0.3 times 0.3, which should be 0.09. I believe, yeah. Which, has anyone calculated it?
Come on. First person to give me the number gets a prize. It'll be a really good prize too. It won't be like a fucking Snickers. Anyone got a number? 16 divided by 1.6 divided by 0.09.
You don't get a prize, Mudge, so keep down.
I know the answer already. No, I need someone to give me the answer, not you. I know the answer. I've been looking at this shit for 3 days.
If you're wrong, I can edit it out, so I won't publicly embarrass you. So.
Can you go grab one of the railways cartons from the spare room, please?
Steam ale, beautiful.
All right, and then so as you'll see, 17.77 is quite a high precipitation rate, and that's why we often fight with specifiers to reduce that. And we get down here now. Oh, sorry, not down here. No more prizes, but you got numbers? No. Fuck them. No more prizes. It's like I want a carton. So now I'm gonna have to do it.
13.33. 10. What are you up to? 0.4, 0.5?
Yep.
8.
Yep.
6.4.
So
you
go.
As Clint said, when we look at 0.3, 0.3 spacings, there's situations where that flow rate works really, really well, especially when we were doing a lot of subsurface drip irrigation in sandy profiles. We were seeing 0.4, 0.5 put into lawn areas. That's just probably shouldn't have even worried about putting the tube in the ground. It's going straight down. We're not getting any lateral spread. Obviously, no different to sprinklers where we're wanting to achieve what we throw out, we throw back. We want that nice overlap. We want to see a same thing with the dripper. We want that drip line to be able to work from one dripper to the other to get a wetted area through that. And that's technically is that application rate. Once that water soaks across, we get that to go down. City of Salisbury stuff, City of Playford stuff, obviously pretty high water holding capacity areas. That it's imperative that we find that balance of not putting it on too fast because we don't want runoff, but not sitting it too slow that we're not getting it to laterally move across that profile and it just sits in its one spot and drops, which you would get if we were at 0.5, for example, in sand. It's going straight down, and it would only keep green, potentially whatever's in right on that dripper line. We're not getting anything across.
The overlaps wouldn't occur,
That's
whereas
right.
we want overlapping to occur.
Yep.
So that's why we quite regularly land on 0.4, 0.4, 1.6, and why it's very important for you to be conscious not to put an incorrect litres per hour dripper in. So you might get a new startup drip tube company that comes in and says, we're going to change the world and we're going to supply you 0.4, 0.4, but we only make it in a 3.5 litre an hour. But that's fine, it's the same shit. It's not. As you'll be able to work out, you divide 3.5 by 0.09 and you're going to get almost probably 25 or 30 mil, and it's just too much water. And in those cases, we might start to look at spreading out the pipes, and that's what we were doing.
39 mil.
What was it? 39. Yeah.
Which is effectively if you imagine remember the old like spray nozzle stuff. It's just dump it on, footpaths are wet. It's exactly the same process.
The other thing is 10 mil is quite easy for the end user to schedule. It's a number that's easily divisible for scheduling, and
it also works.
8's not bad either, but
it also works quite well when we do irrigation designs from an installation standpoint for you guys. Putting 25 mil poly pipe in the ground. You guys like to see laying poly pipe out on the ground, putting in reducing tees or punch starts or whatever it might be for your standard. The 25 mil poly pipe's far easier to work with than the PVC or the HD headers where we're putting in the grommets and that sort of stuff. Obviously they give us a larger area to work on, but it's harder from a maintenance. It's bigger pipe in what is streetscape, small garden beds. You put all this big pipe in the ground, there's no room for bloody sprinklers or, for plants to even go in there because there's all this irrigation infrastructure in there. So what we tend to do there is when we do it with 25 mil, we know we can't exceed about 50 litres a minute through 25 mil poly pipe. When we do 0.4, 0.4, it gives us about 300 square metres of garden bed, and that tends to work quite well for municipal sort of like streetscape areas where we can kind of go along pockets and we can add up 300 square metres worth of garden bed, and that's a solenoid valve, and then we move to the next one. And that's a rough rule, but we know that that's our standard, and it became a standard like for us, maybe 10 years ago where...
It was off the back of Bluestone Mount Barker. So
yeah.
When we're doing an irrigation design, there's obviously the maximum, the design that can be done, and then there's the design that should be done. And back in 2010, 2011, we weren't designing as much, so we were supplying a lot of designs that were impractical for the average installer to install. So you might find that the header pipes were 40 mil PVC, so we're looking at like a roundabout situation in the middle of a road where they want a 40 mil PVC header pipe around the hole, and you guys know how flexible 40 mil PVC is, and then to drill into the top of that, run a pipe up, put an elbow, and have grommets in here, and you're drilling into PVC. And so we started to standardise the system really in line with APG to ensure that the councils were receiving a system with quite standardised fittings so that they didn't have to carry 40 mil PVC couplings and telescopic couplings, and the risk of drilling holes every 400 by we might sell 5,000 takeoff adapters in one job is so high that there could be something that goes wrong, and you're 400 mil underground.
You got swarf in your pipes.
There's a lot more fittings. Yeah. There's PVC involved, so I think it frustrates some of our competitors sometimes that we're designing like that. But the idea is that from a cost standpoint, it's not really that much different when you start factoring in the labour that you're saving, and with central control systems that the council are using, you can quite regularly schedule multiple valves to come on at once. So even though they've got 250 or 300 litres a minute coming into the system, and in theory we should be running a 50 mil header pipe and running 3,000 square metres of drip tube all at once, we still do. We're just doing it by running 10 valves across a council or across a golf course or whatever it might be. But the ongoing maintenance is much more simple, and then the amount of parts that you might need to carry as a contractor and as a council once you adopt that system is reduced.
Yeah, we are genuinely bringing on in designs now 8 to 10 valves at a time, and it seems crazy that you're bringing on. Why wouldn't you just make
One
valve at 50 litres a minute? That can be done, but as Clint said, to try and put 50 mil or even bigger at those sort of flow rates, 80 mil pipe for drip tube it's not feasible. It's actually cheaper to put a $100 25 mil valve set up in the ground. Do you know what I mean? So.
Also, if something goes wrong with one valve, it's a 300 square metre problem.
You're isolating 300 square metres. You're not isolating 2.5 Ks of
Dry Creek, baby.
like streetscape that we're trying to clean up.
Which is a bit, like, it's easy for us to argue that because we're the ones that are trying to push it, but I think the pros of designing like that way outweigh the cons of what we were seeing and the complexities.
Also,
even the use of glue and primer.
The bench out from an installation standpoint, and I don't know exactly from a landscape standpoint how far they go down from back of curb, but I've seen it on site and it doesn't look to be too much below back of curb that we're seeing garden beds, I guess excavated from
you're having to
natural
offset
soil.
your PVC, come back up and come back
Like now you've got a trenching installation costs to actually put that pipe in the ground and come back up, whereas we can we can cultivate our soil, we can lay that on the soil profile, peg that down inside the mulch profile, and then it's done. We're not actually having to remove and trench and clean up and everything.
And it's not at the sacrifice of quality.
No, because
it's
the tube's still in the same spacings. It's just a lot far easier to deal with. Yeah. Do you guys use start connectors or do you use reducing tees? Yep.
Is Playford reducing tees now?
I think they've moved to reducing
Because Adelaide
tees.
is.
Adelaide's reducing tees only, yeah.
And Cobras.
And all steel clamps only. And again, like the poly clip, I guess gets a bad rap, in my opinion, unfairly, but the Cobra clip is exactly that. It is a Cobra clip. So you're now standardising your brand of clip, and it's a stainless steel clip. So it's not so much about it being in my opinion, about it being stainless steel and it giving a stronger clamp. I think it standardises it's the same clip going in.
I think,
I've been involved in.
If there was a shit manufactured metal clamp,
yeah, it's not a stainless steel clip or approved equivalent. We don't see that. It is a
Cobra.
Must be a Cobra clamp, 1925 mil.
Yeah, and if it was an Antelco spec'd, so there's the fittings we stock Antelco, which are made here in St Agnes. If it was standardised that was the clip, I think you'd have less trouble.
Yeah, I did my own irrigation system, forgot clips, and
you're at an irrigation shop every day.
And I'm at an irrigation shop every day on a weekend.
Or two, or three.
I put the system in the ground and I couldn't be bothered driving back to here to grab the clips, so I quickly shot into the green shed and bought some clips, and it was within 1 week I had water bubbling up in my turf areas, and it was the clips had snapped on the bottom of them, whereas you can grab an Antelco clip and literally bend it backwards on itself because it's virgin plastic. It's just, and I guess that's why I say they get a little bit of a bad rap, but you're not going to go wrong with the Cobra clamp either. So it's just interesting to know. I'm just curious as to. It seems like reducing T's become the next standard. The downside is obviously you're cutting that lateral pipe, every 40 centimetres.
The header pipe, quite often you put it in when it's full.
Yep.
And then by summer, it does this.
Stretches out.
Yeah, they get caught as well. Like
Yep.
people, the one advantage of the takeoff adapter is that you can do curved areas really well, but the disadvantages, especially in high vandalism or high traffic areas, like obviously Adelaide City Council removing takeoffs makes so much sense because most of their gardens are trafficked. Either they're leaving footy park or a pub or whatever, and they're physically stepping on the fittings.
We also say to peg lateral and drip tube down every sort of between 1.5 and 2 metres. The beauty of having it in a tee is that's actually a spot where we can actually tee that down, whereas you don't really want to be pegging down a takeoff because it's going to then put force on that. That's right. Yep. No, I definitely agree. All right, so does that make sense from a precipitation rate standpoint? Or I guess why we can always assist you with, if you've got a situation, we can figure out what your precipitation rate is for an area, we can do a theoretical calculation for you as well, or we can come to site, we can do audits. Does that make sense from a how to calculate the precipitation rate and what, I guess, the fundamentals of precipitation is? All good. Did you want to have anyone toilet break or anything like that?
Yeah, we've got half an hour, and I think we'll pretty much be
cool.
like right on it. If anyone
cool.
needs to go to the toilet, feel free. Does anyone want a coffee now? I notice a few of you starting to struggle. That's the strongest I can give you at the moment. All right, cool.
Right.
We'll just keep.
I didn't even notice that, so cool.
Yeah.
All right, so
If anyone wants a coffee, yeah, just kind of put your hand up and Mudge will get it for you wherever he's gone.
yeah,
Yeah, so then I guess we can
going.
move
Keep
on.
going.
Yeah, so obviously now you understand how many mil a system's delivering per hour. There's some basic calculations there on, down the bottom of page 9, which I've written up here not correctly, but if the MP3000 system is applying, what was it, 10 mil?
10 mil, yep.
10 mil an hour, we can obviously, the kind of industry standard for application rates for maintaining a good quality turf surface are in a general, like in early 30 degrees Celsius kind of temperatures, is to deliver 25 mil a week.
For Kikuyu and Buffalo and all your warm season turfs, which would be what you guys are running.
Well, anything that's in your sport open field. I mean, it would be. I'd be very surprised if any of you guys are working on surfaces that aren't Kikuyu, like installation. Yeah, even for APG.
You guys have any
every
surface?
verge is Kai, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and obviously that's a different situation. And then you might be able to talk to the guys that are, looking after the pitches and go, how much water are you applying to these? And they might be like, oh, these need 40 mil, or we want to dry them out. And so we're going the other way. So make sure you don't put any water on it after, I don't know, Thursday. We're going to give it 8 mil. That's how the golf courses work. We work quite closely with golf, and this is really important at golf level because they'll want to slow their greens. So they'll just determine when they're going to water. When they have a tournament, they'll stop watering so that the greens age like they would a cricket pitch.
It's also about, are you guys injecting? Are you putting fertiliser through any systems? No. But it might be something that happens, and even for APG, these are starting to happen more and more in systems where we're putting fertilisers and wetting agents. It's important that we know how much water we're putting out on the site because these products...
Well, like a wetting agent needs 10 mil.
Yeah, it needs 10 mil of water to be watered in, or if it's being injected into it, we need to know how long we're running that for to be able to get a certain amount of wetting agent onto the site. Otherwise, it could be damaging to the turf or damaging to, I guess, dogs and humans and that sort of stuff actually making contact with it.
So obviously 10 quite easily divides out, and we're looking at 2.5 hours of water per week for a 10 mil system. So we would probably look to do that as 2 12.5 mil waterings equally spaced.
At the most, depending, and again, we talk about that we don't want to go more, I wouldn't want to be putting on more than 12.5 mil.
Yep.
And again,
So you might do 3/8.
Correct. And it's just about knowing what your system can take, how quickly it can take it, and how much it can hold as well.
And you'll learn that. Like obviously at home you'll get an understanding of like my lawn, I can't really put more than 4 or 5 mil on my lawn before it's running because I don't know, just a shit lawn, but it's sloped, it's compact as fuck, and it's running R vans, which are 14 or 16 mil?
14,
yeah, so I really have to water, stop, let it soak in, water, stop, let it soak in, water, stop, let it soak in to try and get that. So,
yeah.
Or just rip it out and start again. But so the MP rotator number here and the 3500 number here are pretty much the same. We were getting about 10 mil for each. There will be situations where you might have 8005s that push into the kind of 16s and 18s, and I guess the standard traditional spray nozzles that push up to 30s and 40s. You need to obviously take that into account and go, well, if I'm getting 40 mil an hour, I need to use that formula that's in here to work out. I need to water for 0.6 of an hour a week to get that amount of water, and I really need to think about when I'm doing that and whether or not the soil profile can handle it.
Yeah.
I'll fill these out as well. These are it's just to help you understand, obviously, your run times, which we'll move into scheduling, which we will be talking about next.
Yep.
Obviously, talk about that, the drip tube and the soil profiles.
Yeah, so I've put in there on the top part of page 10 And this is just a guide. City of Salisbury would have been involved in IPOS regulations coming through. This is off the back of that as well, just understanding those infiltration rates. What I've got there is obviously sand being normally, as a general rule, greater than 20 mil of infiltration rate. Sandy loam 10 to 18, obviously that's quite varied, but it's a bit of a guide. Clay loam 5 to 10, and then clay less than 5 mil. The idea behind that is just to give you guys a thought process of understanding when we're talking about, I guess, the drip system, like up here doing 17.7 mil, and we put that in a clay situation that can only take 5 mil an hour. There's actually effectively 12 mil that's not even going to be able to be taken into that profile. Now over that whole area, you've got a centimetre of water in 1 hour that's not even, that's gone. It's just run off and down your gutter. So what we would do there, and from a scheduling standpoint, is we either, one, at a design level, make sure our application rate's lower so we're getting a nice soaking into it, so we space that out accordingly, or we do what's called cycle and soak. So if you are stuck with a system that is doing 17 mil an hour, but you know you can only be taking 5 in a clay situation, we cycle and soak. So we might say, well, we only want to be giving it, let's say 5, but so I'll water enough run time to give it 5 mil, and then I'll wait an hour. So we'll move to the next stations and we'll move around our system, and then we'll come back to that and give it another 5. And so we're allowing that, which is exactly what they call it, cycle and soak. So we're basically putting little amounts on, we leave it and we let it soak in, and we put another amount on so we can get that water profile in. The exact same thing happens even on a sandy profile, where if we're putting on the water at a too heavy a rate, it actually pushes through the profile before it actually gets what's called the capillary action, which is where the water grabs to all those sand particles and starts to move across. So we want to put it on, again, at sporadic moments, or on the edge of footy ovals. I think you guys might have some ovals, but you'll see, you know, embankments, even around wetlands and stuff like that, you've got these turf embankments. Obviously, slope becomes an issue. As you're applying that water, it's got to be able to have time to soak in before it just runs away and runs down a hill, and then you end up with all your water at the bottom. What we do there is we cycle and soak. So we'll put a small amount on, let it soak in, go around, leave it, come back. We're not watering anything because we're still moving to all the other stations. So sometimes your watering window can be expanded, but at the cost of actually getting water where it needs to go. Is otherwise don't water at all. So if that makes sense. So what have you put the run times in for the drip tube?
Yeah, so I've run them down here. So 1.4 hours, 1.87 hours, 2.5 hours, 3.12 hours, and
To apply
25 mil.
25 mil, yeah.
I think that's just important for you to understand. Obviously, there's a relationship, and you know, the higher the precip, the lower the runtime. Obviously,
Correct.
We've got about 23 minutes. I'm just conscious to move through
Yeah, absolutely.
sensors quickly.
Yep.
And then we can talk about that really detailed question, and then maybe you could do some troubleshooting with the multimeter to finish up. And
Yep.
then if anyone wants to stick around and ask questions, obviously we've had this listed from 1 till 3. We'll try and land it to finish right on 3 so that no one's stuck. And then if you want, we can stick around, you can have a play with the multimeter or ask more specific questions of things that maybe didn't quite make sense at the time.
All right, so sensors, I guess I'll touch on this pretty quickly, is there's 2 different types. You've got a direct method and indirect type of sensor. Direct sensors are actual soil moisture sensors, rain sensors. We're physically taking an actual reading direct on the site. So if we've got a soil moisture sensor, it's actually sitting in the soil profile, taking a moisture reading and giving us an actual, either a number back, or it's actually cutting the irrigation for us. Rain sensors collecting the amount of rain, either reporting how many mils we've received into our central control system, like a tipping bucket where it actually tips and it will tell us how many mils we've actually seen, or the old leather disc style ones, which are still valid, where the water will basically collect in there, swells that up to a point, and then it will basically flick a switch until such time that as that dries out, it tries to, I guess, emulate soil by that leather disc drying out, and then at which time it will click off, and then it allows any system of watering to continue on. Same as temperature as well, where we can actually see what's actually happening. The indirect sensors are more around taking, I guess, what I like to call like environmental data, ET averages. Evapotranspiration is one where we see how much water as a reference crop has come out of the actual system for a day. So based on solar radiation, wind, there's ET data that comes out of the Adelaide Airport where it gives us a number, and that might be on a day it might say your ET figure's 10 mil. So that's an indicator for you guys to also know. And a lot of the time now with your central control systems, I'm assuming you might be using ET now, where it actually takes that information from weather station data and brings it in, and it'll tell you what you're actually using, what has come out as a reference crop, and then you know that's what I need to replenish. If I've lost 10 mil, I need to put 10 mil on. And so those schedules will actually change accordingly. So instead of you thinking you're always doing, as we did here, it might be 3 sessions of 30 minutes, 40 minutes a week. Well, today was a bit milder, we had cloud cover, it was a cooler day. We didn't lose 10 mil, we only lost 7 mil. So the replenishment now isn't 30 minutes, it might be 17 minutes tonight. And so normally what I see with people that are taking into these, whether it's indirect or direct inputs, is a minimum across your year per site is a 30% reduction in your water without compromising on your, from traditional standard practices where it's just like, I don't know, just 3 times a week for 1 hour. 30% reduction in water without really compromising your turf quality at all. If anything, probably maintaining an improved standard of turf quality as well. That's probably about it from a sensor standpoint. Obviously, soil moisture sensors, they have a place. My opinion around, what's that?
In the ground?
In the ground, yeah.
Did anyone laugh?
A couple chuffed, yeah. The problem I have with a soil moisture sensor is it's very direct to one spot in an oval. And I've been involved in a lot of installs where I've seen a main line get installed across an oval or around an oval, and you see the colour of the soil profile that's come up around the oval, and yet we've gone and decided that's the best spot to put a soil moisture sensor. But that pocket of a footy field is full of clay, and that's sandy, but that's sandy here. So we're then scheduling or controlling our system based on a sandy profile, but that whole area is clay. It's a little bit
We saw one
selective, if that makes sense.
in Mitcham Council where the soil moisture sensor was outside the boundary line.
Yeah.
So it wasn't indicative of the playing field at all.
Yep.
And I don't even know if sprinklers were, I think the sprinklers were installed to the boundary line.
Yeah. And auditing City of Salisbury stuff 12 years ago, forgot the name of it, off Park Terrace in Brahma Lodge there. There's the soccer fields with the tennis court, the netball court next to it, I think it was. And they had someone playing there, and it's tipped one of those sporting Gatorade drink things out just for the finish of the night, and it happened to be, Dave Mercer told me about this one, and it happened to be on top of a soil moisture sensor. The oval was bone dry for quite a period of time because that area where the soil moisture sensor was soaked for weeks, but that acted on the rest of the site. And it was literally just someone tipping out some drinks on that one spot. So that's a very extreme example, but it's not at the same time. It is indicative. So,
do you want me to talk about this now?
Yep.
All right, I'll try and smash through this in about 8 minutes, and that'll give Matt 10 minutes to talk about diagnostics of controllers. So on this is the first time we've done this curriculum of advanced irrigation, and I think it's probably a 2.5 hour session that we're trying to get done in 2, but as I said, if you've got questions afterwards, we can talk about it. So all of the information that we've delivered so far helps you understand the, obviously, basics of irrigation, how to stick it together. The first hour and 3/4 of this is understanding how much it's delivering, then understanding the relationship with sensors. Obviously, sensors can get involved and reduce run times or completely turn systems off in the event that there's been irrigation or that there's, or a rain event, sorry. Now, I've written a very detailed question here, and it's probably, I've written all the answers up there just so that you can fill them out yourself and look at it later. In a council situation, which everyone in this room's dealing with, you've got external impact such as availability of water or watering windows or watering budgets. And so all the information that we've learnt to date, so all of the numbers we've worked out, the 10 mil or the 12 mil or how much we're applying, can all then be used to calculate when to schedule irrigation to make sure that we're fitting inside the requirements of the site. So for a golf course, we can't irrigate when golfers are playing, and that is if the sun is up. And so the watering window is at night. For the foreshore that Charles Sturt, so semaphore, they've got a probably even worse watering window because there's people out running and doing yoga and shit before the sun comes up, and there's people getting paro before the sun, or after the sun's gone down. So that lawn, the watering time becomes quite small. So when we're designing a system, we're having to calculate, is it practical and is it achievable for us to be able to apply the required amount of water to that area inside the watering window that we have available to us using the water source that we have available to us, and then also staying inside the budget. So obviously you guys at council have got a watering budget that you have to stick to. You're only allowed to spend, say, $1 million a year on water. Okay, well, that's this many mil. We're trying to apply this much mil to this many square meters. Do we have enough water? And again, like we talked about with doing that flow versus pressure test very early in the piece, you can go back to your seniors and go, we don't have enough water. And then they're like, well, I don't give a fuck. That's the budget sorted out. And you're like, well, then this oval can't get enough water to meet the standards that you've given us. So you've given us rules here and you've given us rules here. Which one do you want to do? You want to break the dollar rule or do you want to break the safety rule? Because that's all we can do. And so this calculation here is how we get to that. So in some cases, and obviously I talked about Charles Sturt's irrigation system, they've got a lot of systems where the water will come into the tank at the same speed that it goes out. So it doesn't matter, you can just water when you want to. This situation I've created is probably one of the more complex situations that you're going to come up against, where you've got a tank that needs to refill and you've got a watering window that you need to adhere to. Now, if you have a look, I've calculated that we only need to irrigate for 1,068 minutes a week to deliver the amount of water that we propose to deliver, and we have 5,040 available irrigation minutes because we've taken 7 days of 12 hours. So as you'll see in the question, we can't water outside of 7 and 7, so we've still got 12 hours at night to water. As I've written in this document, it's really not desirable for you to be applying water, it's like kind of early in the night if possible, if it's going to get cold or there's frost chances. Obviously there's disease that might arise. So that spreadsheet that I've done on the next thing, I started filling out the first line just to give you an idea of where I was going with this. As Matt talked about before, we don't want to necessarily apply that 25 mil all-in-one watering event, and it might be more ideal for us to apply 8 mil 3 times a week, or it might be more ideal for us to apply 12 mil twice a week. So what we can do is we can take the information here. So we've got all these parameters that say we can only water from 7 p.m. till 7 a.m. We've got a fair bit of flexibility with the amount of time, so we're only going to use 20% of that watering window. So when should we do that? And if we can say work backwards from the last, so if you want the system to turn off at 7 a.m, that's what I'd be looking at, going from 7 a.m and working backwards and going, well, if we can apply 80 minutes, which is what I've got here, so we can apply 80 minutes of water before the tanks have to fill back up. So let's have an 80-minute cycle finish at 7 a.m, so let's work backwards and then work out how long that tank's going to take to fill up, which is 192 minutes to get back up to capacity, then do another 80 minutes, and just see how many of those 80-minute cycles we can get in one night. And you might find that you can do you might be able to do all the irrigation 2 nights a week, because this is us just looking at one reserve, but this might be one of 20 or 30 reserves that are all taking water from a bigger infrastructure. So,
which is Salisbury.
Well, it's everyone, isn't it?
Well,
really?
more from you have a water supply that, as I said before, you need to know. You get water. I think you guys actually do it for some people. They get water on certain nights available to them through pump systems. You guys get water on certain nights. Yeah.
So
I know Uncle Paringa do the
footy
same
clubs
thing
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all of this that you've learnt today and that you've remembered, you can now use this to go calculate that. And if you're working in, I guess, in the the department that's calculating this, now you go, okay, well, why do they need that much water, right? Like you might say, like as the council or even as SA Water, you're going, because we do this for River Lee, which is being done right now. We're working with the whole thing. How much water do we need for this whole subdivision to be able to irrigate? And the calculations are above us, that they're being done by actual hydraulic engineers, but they'll go, this is how, like we know, like they'll come to us and go, how many mil of water do you want to apply? Or how many square meters are we going to be designing? And then they can go do these calculations, exactly these calculations, just on a grander scale.
We're providing them the irrigation requirement, but
Yeah.
then they've got to build that into what all the houses
Into
are also
all their
providing.
water,
So, yeah.
Now, there's a section, and I'm happy to explain this after if you guys, I'm just very conscious of time. Once all of this is installed, the system's effectively complete, right? You've installed your irrigation system. The only thing that is required now is maintenance and in some cases handover. And I've written a section here about doing an audit. Now, Playford Council have been talking recently about potentially introducing a distribution uniformity test upon handover of an irrigation system. So there's some reading here about DUs. What it is in a very simple term is that we or you or the council or a third-party irrigation auditing firm would come out and put catch cans. So that picture that's on page 14, they'd space catch cans inside a predetermined area. They'd run an irrigation cycle for 15 minutes or whatever it might be, because obviously, we know like that it's delivering 10 mil. I mean, the 15 minutes is relevant, but you want to get enough water that
15 minutes is for statistical analysis.
That's right. So you can start to get enough water in the cans, because at 15, even like we've done audits where 15 minutes there's no water in the cans, or there's 2 mil, or like there's nothing.
Yeah, it's bone dry.
So using that information, then they can determine whether or not the system meets the theoretical distribution uniformity, or it's above, say, 75%. And 75% is a number that we would expect systems to be at or above.
Well, rainfall's only 95, so
you're never going to get perfect
day,
distribution.
it's never perfect. So,
and we do audits where we'll find the DU to be 50, 48, 56, because the sprinklers aren't upright, the sprinklers aren't high enough, the grass is over the nozzle, the
and what
nozzle's
Clint's
been
saying is
drilled
about
out.
DU is actually as a percentage, or when we're saying 75, 80%, it's the uniformity of that,
Of the lowest quarter.
the lowest 25% of that system. So what's its worst 25% of that area in that? And so we try and pick a good test analysis area. The benefit of what that does for us as well, and we're doing these for golf courses, is it tells us what our actual application rates are as well. So we've got the theoretical, which we've done today, but then we've got an actual application rate. So then you can exactly what's happening on site. And if, as an example, if you're 60% uniformity, to get that to 100, what that means is you need to water 40% more to get it back, those other areas up to 100, which means the wettest areas have to be overwatered by 40%
to get
to get the lowest 25% to the bare minimum that they need, which is a waste of water. So why we do all this stuff at the start is to try and get a good system, so you can try and maintain. We'll design systems wherever absolutely possible to be 85% as our design standard.
Yeah.
And then there's obviously impacts. I could run a DU test 4 times in a row and I'll get a varied number, because depending on where that sprinkler started or what gust of breeze came through.
We'll take wind, or was it anemometers?
Yep.
Wind tests during them, and if the wind's too high, we can't do them. So,
Cool.
but yeah, the counts. I can see a point in the next 10 years where 30% of councils are requiring DUs off the back of one of them starting to do it. I think it's important to understand what that means, and even just the basic auditing. So, you'll have a handover or PC where they'll come and check that the sprinklers are actually sitting upright and the valves are in the ground in the right way and the valve boxes have been installed correctly. The DU is that next level up from that, which is actually testing that, as much as it looks like it's been installed correctly, is it delivering what it's meant to be delivering? So there's a bunch of information in there about that. Again, come and talk to us if you need to.
We had, that was primarily what I did. I pretty much audited every site in Salisbury, and
He's been talking about this for 15 years.
Yeah, a tilted sprinkler and I do a DU test on a tilted sprinkler, and I was getting 55% uniformity, and I straightened them up and got them right and got it back to 70% just by bringing that back up again. The result is...
It's important to remember
grass,
as well that a DU test is exactly like a moisture sensor in one spot. Like we're testing
selective,
4
yeah.
sprinklers. So if you've got large areas or tree canopies that are ingressing on some parts of it, it might be worth doing a multiple, like doing it 3 or 4 DU tests, or doing a DU test on your cricket wicket and doing a DU test on the outer area as well. So, so the last bit here is about troubleshooting solenoid valves. It's the thing that we get asked about the most. And in the irrigation basics training, we talk about all of the things that you can do to diagnose what might be wrong with a solenoid valve, but it doesn't include using a multimeter. If you're going to be doing irrigation professionally as a full-time thing, it would be advisable to have a multimeter handy. It's going to help you diagnose problems quicker and get you out of there.
There's quality products, but these are also like $15. So,
we bought them on eBay, right? I don't know where we got them from. We got heaps of them.
Yeah, we sell them. So.
Oh, we sell them.
Yeah.
We don't buy them on eBay. I'll send you guys the link when he's not around.
So there's a couple of different options, obviously, before we go into the multimeter side of things, but you've obviously got
Valve diagnostic stuff, yeah.
valve diagnostic stuff. This is one that we do a lot for people. It's a frequency base. I don't want this to...
They said they set it for you.
What's that?
Oh, it was set.
I've just turned it back up.
Yep.
So this is a pretty straightforward unit. We turn that on and we can adjust the sensitivity of that unit. We can put a piece of conduit in that so we don't have to bend over on the valve. So you can just hold that down to a valve box. The idea behind that is if you can't find a valve in the system, you can turn that valve on from the controller, walk around where you, I guess, an idea of where you think it might be, and you'll hear it scream at you, and I guess an audio side of things, and you know that there's a coil down there, and you'll be able to actually find it because it might obviously have a hydraulic problem or someone's isolated a valve or something's happening. You can find that coil. That works obviously when you've got continuity or a connection to that unit as well, because obviously there's got to be power going down there too. So, but yeah, these are really handy because we just guys have got these just in everyone's toolboxes that I can't find a site, they just quickly grab that. Pretty similar to that, but again from an audible standpoint is what we call a valve locator or a chatter unit. The chatter boxes have been going around for quite a while. What this unit does is you've got alligator clips on it. Pretty straightforward. You basically wire in at the controller point because obviously you know where your controller is. You take it out of the wires of the controller, and between the controller and the wire you put this unit in between the main line, and what happens is as there's power going down the line, this thing's basically chattering that at a fast pace that electrical current on and off. So what's happening is you actually hear your valve chattering and vibrating quite loudly, and you'll hear it like really noisy sort of knocking noise at the valve. So it's what they call a chatter box, and you can go out there and actually again hear it, especially if you've got it in garden beds and you can't find something as well. So that's another little handy unit. What's that? Yeah. So these are handy
Bit of
to
crowd
have.
involvement. This is good.
Yeah.
It's 4 minutes to 3. He's starting to get restless.
Yeah. Then
They're
you go
not
to another,
expensive either. Like
no, these,
they're
200.
That's ridiculous.
$30, but
No, these are
not.
really inexpensive. What are they, like 40 or 50 bucks? Every time I quote prices in training, it's from 10 years ago when I used to work in an irrigation shop. So
Yeah. Don't.
on multi-core, yeah.
Yep.
The Armada tool that he's about to talk about, there's another one above it.
There's about like 9 different options.
We're going to do a
yeah.
session with them, just purely on diagnostic tools.
Yep.
So
And not so much about. It'll be.
How do you use
Literally, we'll set up some faults and we'll go and do it all. These are pretty similar things. You can buy this as its own kit unit, or you can buy this as it is now with a kit. Same sort of thing. We can obviously test control down wires with the unit, and it will tell whether we've got a good circuit, a short circuit as well. But we can also send signals down the line with this unit and activate. If you don't have a power source available, this can also turn on coils for us as well. With the batteries packed inside. Obviously it won't last forever, but it's going to be able to let us turn things on. And then we've got our actual, I guess, an audible sort of stick where same sort of thing, we can go down the line and actually track it. The beauty of doing something like that is it actually gives us a very rough but an idea of where our cable paths are as well, because we can obviously be going across the cable paths and putting it across the valves. As Clint said, you've got Armada do other options, which is, you've probably seen your cable location guys out there finding 240 volts. There's all those sort of units. I used to use one when I was out on the tools as well, and you just connect to your station that you want, or your cable path that you want. I just clamp over it, put the screwdriver in the ground bulldog clip, and then I'd be able to walk along, and I would find the cable until I lost signal, because I might be dead out in an area, and then I'd come back and I'd find it, spray paint or dig a hole, and I'd know something's happened down here and there's a break in the line. And it can give you strength signals and all that sort of stuff, and you can get headphones with them, so if you're in a streetscape where there's cars going past, you can actually hear what's going on. So all different options. Go on to the multimeter side.
I think, yeah, you got
Yep.
a minute or two, I'd do that, otherwise
Yep.
Dylan's going to be very pissed off because he set up the screens.
One thing that happens a lot is we don't know whether or not we've got faulty cabling, we've got a dead coil on the solenoid valve. We do tests, people go out and take coils out, change it over, redo wire joins, all that sort of stuff. A lot of the times we don't need to do that. We can just literally use a cheap multimeter to figure out what's happening on. This works on, obviously, on an AC coil, where we look for ohms of resistance on a multimeter. I'll just come over this side so everyone can see. You guys see that all right? Yep. So you got your omega symbol on your multimeter, and obviously we set that to the 200. Reason being is we don't have more than that in resistance levels. What I tend to do is, if we were to pretend that...
Oh, that's right, he's got...
Yeah, that's all right. If we were to
I'll hold them.
pretend that these were wired at the controller across the common, which you could do now if you like, hold it against the terminals, against common and say station 1, and that would be wired in on the controller. What I would do here is I would then put them on the wires. It's going to do that for me. Can you guys see that number on the screen? Yep, so Rainbird coils will tend to give me around that 41 ohms of resistance. What that would tell me, you'll see a little bit more resistance than that because you've obviously got cable going out to it. There's literally just only this amount of cable. But that tells me that I've got a good coil on that valve. And then if I did it on a Hunter coil, I'd see something like 25 ohms of resistance on a Hunter coil. Just different brands, they've got different levels of resistance. But either way, when I used to see a number, I kind of knew, cool, I've got a coil hanging off of that solenoid, which means my wires are intact because that wire is giving me feedback that I'm actually seeing a coil on the other end. If I was to go to, and it's not going to, obviously I don't have a dead coil on me, what will happen is on the screen, if I went across a coil that was blown, like this coil was dead, I would see an overload or an OL, depending on the brand. It would give me an overload button, indicator on the screen. That tells me that I've got a dead coil. Straight away, if we know where the coil is, we can go out there, replace the coil, do a new wire join, and we're good to go because that coil is obviously blown, which means it's connected straight through. And I haven't had to do any wire joins yet to figure out, like a lot of people you see them cutting out, changing it. You can literally just stay clean, do it all at the controller and figure out what's going on. The other side of things that we like to do is to test. This works obviously for predominantly multi-core systems. 2-wire paths are different because they're giving out a frequency. That's a whole nother Dakota diagnostics, which we can do again if people want to do that. I always check, am I getting power from my transformer to my controller? So normally you'll see these points in the controller come out from the transformer into here, and it will say 24 VAC. I set the controller to 200 on the volts in the AC current symbol. Sorry, arrow there. So we're seeing we got volts. Okay, cool, I know my transformer's working. If that was showing me voltage and that screen was dead, I know that the controller's, it's not about power coming in or my transformer's faulty. I know my controller just up top here is dead. Then if we were to turn on stations, I've got so station 4 I've just turned on there. I would then go across the common here again with voltage and across the station number that I'm wanting to see, and I can see I'm now getting voltage down that line, but I'm not getting really anything on the station 2 or 3, but I am getting it on station 4. What I can then do is then, if I know that I'm getting it there, I can go to the solenoid valve at that location. If we were wanting to test our voltage drop, sometimes we've seen jobs where they've extended way too long with their cable and they're not getting any power. So what I'll do is, which is called voltage drop, there is ways of calculating that, but obviously instead of trying to calculate it, just test it at the site. Take that coil out, look across your valves, across the 2 wires. You would see, you know, it might be black and red here, which means you'd go into that valve box and you see the red cable in that solenoid, and you would grab the red cable and the black cable and test the voltage, and you might see 11 volts, 12 volts, which means it's a really low amount of voltage, which means that there's either nicks in the cable because you're losing voltage out through, and that will tend to happen at times like this in the year where it's wet because water's a conductor, so it'll want to go out a lot easier. And that's where you do tend to find a lot of the irrigation faults are after a good rain event or after an irrigation event. Or you can, you might find that the cable sizing is too small, and obviously, as you've probably seen, we do 0.5 mil, 1 mil, 1.5, up to 4 mil. So there's a reason for that cable size, is it's about distance that we're trying to travel. That's really basic. I guess for me, the ohms reading on a cable is something that I don't think it's so simple, but can just, without having to actually go to a valve box and dig it up and undo things, just literally go up to the station and go, someone tells you, oh, station 5's not working. I used to go up there straight away, look at it, yeah, it's wired in, okay, turn this on to Omega, go across station 5 and it says overload, and I'm like, oh, the coil's dead. Do you know what I mean? And straight away you go straight to your ute, grab a coil, 2 wire joiners, and you're out of there in 20 minutes and it's sorted. It's easy because they'll tell you, oh, we've turned it on manually, so it's watering there, so you know that no one's turned the water off on you. It's just not coming on another way. So really, really easy. Again, $15 part, sits in your toolbox. So yeah. But again, like Clint said, we'll do a diagnostic tool showcase coming up, which we'll send invites out for.
Yeah, we'll continue to do training as much as you want. Obviously, neither of us are qualified trainers, but we've been doing it for a while. So hopefully today brought some value and that you've taken something away that will help you in your day-to-day. I'm conscious of time, it is 3:06. So as I said, Matt and I will be here. I think I've got to leave at 4 for another event. But then if you want to ask questions, feel free to. I just threw some beers on the table. I don't know the protocol. I'm not sure if you're allowed to have them. I'm not going to give them to you. If you take one, you take one. If you don't, you don't. And yeah, just thanks for your continued support. The relationship that we've got with both of your businesses is very valuable to me, and we really appreciate it. So thanks for your time today.
Thanks, guys.
Well done.